To kick us off with on-the-ground success stories, we're actually going to pipe in Aaron Fukuda from Tulare Irrigation District. He's going to tell us about how Tulare was successfully able to divert over 250,000 acre feet during this last winter year. Aaron, are you with us?
I am, folks. Can you hear me?
Woohoo! Yes, we don't see you. Can we see you
Uh,
now really quickly, or are you hiding?
I've got my camera on, so I'm not quite sure.
Maybe it's on our end. Well, we hear you loud and clear, Aaron. So the floor is yours when you're ready.
Well, that's great. Can you see my PowerPoint?
We can. Yes.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody. Really appreciate Director Nemit's message. It is hope that we see out here. She's right. We're all smiling, put it that way. There was flood concerns out here, but we were all smiling as we were managing through it. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to the cool kids, right? I was that nerd in high school, right? I was the math whiz and never really the cool kid. And it seems like being a part of this recharge world, I found where I'm the cool kid now. And so I really appreciate that. So I'm going to share some of our activities that we were doing. And I do apologize for not being able to be up there. But there's a lot of stuff happening down here. Unfortunately, today is my board meeting day. And so I'm in between board meetings right now. So this fit perfectly. Let's get started here and give you a kind of a landscape view of where I'm presenting from. We are in the Kauai Subbasin. I am also the interim general manager of the Mid-Kauai Groundwater Sustainability Agency, which is a partnership between the city of Visalia, city of Tulare, and Tulare Irrigation District. We represent about 100,000 acres of the 440,000 acres in the Kauai Subbasin, which is a critically overdrafted subbasin. The irrigation district itself, which I also manage, is about a 65,000 acre irrigation district, large network of canals and access to about 1,300 acres of recharge basins that really span between the city of Visalia in the northeast and the city of Corcoran in the southwest there. And Tulare sits right in the kind of eastern edge of our irrigation district. And we have a lot of partnerships with them on recharge and surface water programs. So just a framework under which you can kind of understand our irrigation district. We're an old irrigation district formed in 1889. A lot of our infrastructure is built around surface water delivery. We have 65,000 acres of irrigated agriculture, and we serve that ground through 300 miles of earthen canal, which we've now implemented as a full recharge parameter within our tools. As you can see, we don't pipe many of our canals. We only have about 30 miles of pipeline, and we don't line our canals either. Although we notoriously tried to line one of our canals in the 90s, subsequently sued. And what we like to say is, in order to be TID's friend, you either have to sue us or we have to sue you, then we become best friends. And now we have a lot of programs with the city of Visalia and the neighboring landowners on groundwater recharge. We do have 1,300 acres of recharge basins, so that is a major tool we use this year. And our average annual surface water supply is about 150,000 acre feet per year. That number is declining over time, but we're working on increasing that. That's made up of two water supplies, basically a pre-1914 water right and a CVP right supply. And this year we did touch some class 2, but because we had so much Kauai water supply, mainly our recharge was with Kauai River water. We have about 200 growers, so we're still a small irrigation district, and our main crops are corn, wheat, alfalfa with some nut crops. So we're basically a dairy dominant irrigation district. So I appreciate being the keynote, and I wanted to make sure I understood what I was supposed to do. So I'm supposed to share the prevailing tone or central theme. And I know that this time last year, we were going into 3 years of drought, and all of the messaging out there was about being prepared for the next drought. And I remember talking at a lot of different conferences, Aqua and other things, about how we're getting ready to be prepared for that. And so we transitioned then 3 months later into what was just unexpectedly a tremendously wet year, and spent the next 9 months recharging. So I appreciate my keynote is supposed to be about groundwater recharge. But I have to start, the story actually begins in the drought for us. And really what in 2022, our Sigma compliance looked somewhat like this. We're here to help, we're going to allocate, we're going to restrict, and then we're going to charge you for your own groundwater. So obviously that led to our mid-Kauai emergency ordinance, which at that time I was not a very popular person in my area, if you can imagine. Now that's changed, like I said, I'm a cool kid now. And the farmers appreciated putting this into action because this emergency ordinance, although we were allocating and restricting growers, we also set up a framework under which they understood that what they put in is what they get to take out in the future. So we have this structure where we allocate native yield at the bottom at no cost, and then our tier water at a cost, but there's a cap at which they can't. And this is all measured as evapotranspiration, not a meter on a well. So we're using the satellite imagery. Just to put things in perspective, our growers use about 3 acre-feet per acre for the average crop. So there's obviously some above and some below. And we capped groundwater pumping in 2022 at 2.5 acre-feet per acre. So growers had to figure out how they were going to cut back and live within those restrictions. So we developed a system looking at how to cut back. We developed an online tool to allow growers to see their allocation. When we allocated in 2022, they had 1,000 acre-feet in their account, and then on a monthly time step, they could see how much they were using each month. And so again, everything was developed in the confines of cutting back and managing a cutback. And they can access this online tool on their phones. They can on computers anywhere and see their accounts on a 30-day time step. And then what happened is January showed up. So in early January, late December, we started to see the storms come in. And what we learned is a lot of people assume that in a recharge activity, you're just going to go fill everything up right away. What we did is we left a lot of our system open because we saw the tremendous flood flow. So you have to leave your system open and fill it up as the atmospheric rivers started to come in. Once we got the system filled up, then we started to basically open up our phone lines for irrigation deliveries, is how we started the program. We filled up our recharge basins, and then we said, if anybody wants to take water, well, immediately, the day of opening our phone lines, 80 turnouts came online within a few hours. And by the weekend, we were up to about 120 orders. So what we realized is that tool that we developed in 2022 was really built to be not only a tool to manage cutbacks, but it became an incentive tool to have growers put that water out in their fields. So traditionally in a normal January pre-Sigma, we probably move maybe 300 CFS into our district, January, February time period. Like I said, by the first weekend we fired up in the second week of January, we were at 700 CFS per day, or 1,500 acre-feet per day. So we had almost doubled our ability to put water out in the district there. So that water was going to field irrigation, and a majority of that, again, is going to the groundwater system because there's not a lot of evapotranspiration. There's no crops growing in January and February. We filled up our entire canal system pre-Sigma. We would only fire up portions of it that were headed to recharge basins. This year, we filled up every channel we could fill up without causing any flooding concerns. And then we put water in all of our 1,300 acres in recharge basins. So here's a small snippet of the new recharge basins that we brought online in the last 10 years or so. The Cordonese Basin was a Bureau of Reclamation grant, the Part 3 settlement. We added 60 acre recharge basin in a groundwater trough throughout our district, and we fired that up this year. The Swall and Creamline Basin complex, the Swall Basin was added, and you can see it in the upper section there a little bit. It was just filling up when I took this picture, and that's a workhorse basin that's a partnership with the city of Tulare for groundwater recharge up gradient of the city of Tulare. And then the Martin Basin recharge site is located behind our office facility here, and that was fired up. Interestingly, in our district, we had the luck of when those basins completed construction, we began a drought. So our growers have told us no more recharge basins in Tulare Irrigation District because we always end up in a drought. So we are actually putting our focus more on the winter irrigation in the fields where we saw the most success. And often people want to say, well, what does that look like? What happened? And we have pictures of how that took place, but it looks like irrigation that we run during the summertime. So we had growers that had fields furrowed up and they did irrigation down the furrows with siphon pipes. We had growers in the pistachios, which seemed to be a very good hardy tree. They would just flood their field there. And then we also had some people that were doing some trials. And so this is a grower that was putting it out in the walnuts to see if there was any damage. And so those trees did fine. And so we're beginning to learn a lot more about putting excess water out in our fields in the wintertime. And during that time period, it was interesting because our growers really took to the idea that this is going to be part of their future of managing their groundwater supplies. So right now, as we ended our fall irrigation, our growers have gone back out into the fields and started to set themselves up in the event that the year turns wet again in December. So I did have a staff member that was out in the field seeing some stuff, and he said, oh my gosh, Aaron, these guys are setting up their fields already and they're going to go try and plant a third crop. And I said, no, I think they're going to do groundwater recharge. And sure enough, we turned the nozzle back on in late September and into October. And growers, after they harvested their corn or silage, they went back into recharge mode, and we finished the year on by putting another spurt of groundwater into the groundwater system. So our growers are learning through these tools to be their own recharge agents. So prior to Sigma, we had one recharge agent in Tulare Irrigation District, and that was the district itself and its staff. And now we have 201. So everybody's cooperating and participating and learning and building the knowledge base. And we're prepared for the next wet year, but we're also prepared for the drought because we have our emergency ordinance in place, and we're only allocating out the water that we put into the ground. So whatever we put in this year gets allocated out next year for pumping. We're trying not to allocate overdraft. Here's how the preliminary numbers shape up for us. These are preliminary. I even got some numbers back today, so the numbers are a little bit higher by a few thousand acre feet. But the message here today is that this year we diverted a record-breaking amount of diversions into the district. So this is not water into the ground. Right now, what I have is the diversion number at 414,000 acre feet. We generally say about half of that ends up in our groundwater system or a little bit more. And then the more impressive part about that is how much water made it out to the irrigation turnouts. And so this is where our farmers participated in the system. And as you can see, this was a much bigger record. They put out about 190,000 acre feet into the fields. Some of that was to meet irrigation demand, but a large portion of that ended up in our groundwater system. And thanks to the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation, we are moving our monitoring system over to dedicated monitoring wells throughout our district with data loggers. And so we can see the daily, if not, hourly trends in groundwater systems. And so these are our initial readings that we took just a week or two into August. And as you can see, our groundwater levels are rebounding. That first one on the top, that rebounded high, is located near a channel. So we think when we ran high flows in that channel, that's when we got that large peak. We have gone out and taken our October readings, and I don't have them completed, but I know across the district, our average is probably groundwater increases are between 20 and 25 feet in the unconfined aquifer. And because the confined aquifer is pressurized, and I don't have that data up here, we're seeing numbers anywhere between 50 and 100 feet in the confined aquifer, but that's a pressurized system down there because we do have the Corcoran clay. So We are seeing, and this is a kind of a high number for us. In 2017, a big wet year, we did a lot of groundwater recharge, and our groundwater levels came up about 18 feet. So we're above our 2017 increases. And again, into the future, under Sigma, our goal is to get that water level up and then allocate those, allocate it out such that any drops do not go down too steep to cause any undesirable results. So we're moving in that right direction towards sustainability, and groundwater recharge plays a good role in that process. And lastly, I wanted to cover some of the cool toys that I know we've all talked about, we've learned about, and how we're using it for groundwater recharge. Many of you know the SkyTemp system. DWR has flown the state. This data is amazing to have in your hands. We've taken the SkyTemp data that TID has, and we've looked at our aquifer system and know at what portions and throughout the district where we need to start putting our water. In that diagram in the upper right-hand corner, we're trying to focus our groundwater recharge in the western side of our subbasin in order to fill those aquifers up. As you can see on the east side, our aquifers are very shallow and thin, so they fill up very quickly, and we're trying to push it into the west side now to fill up those aquifers. And then lastly, the totem unit that we purchased is now in high demand. Our growers are now calling us on a regular basis. We queue them up, and what they're doing is having us come out and image their fields so that they can make determinations on what they want to use their field for in relation to groundwater recharge. So for instance, we had a landowner that took out 100 acres of almonds this year. We pulled our totem unit out there so that he can make a decision. Is that ground better for recharge, or is it better for some other purpose like trees or something else? If the soils are heavier, he's probably going to go back in with some sort of cropping pattern that he can do. If it's sandy soil, he's going to choose to leave that ground out and get it ready for recharge. If we don't have a wet year and he has enough groundwater credits to farm it, he'll farm it. So we can give them data to make these decisions and almost incentivize them to use their fields to put excess water out. We get these kind of heat maps down there, and then they can tell the red is sand and the blue is clay. So it's a little bit of opposite color theory there from what we would traditionally see. Blue is water bearing areas, but the red is where the sandy areas are at. So this is why we're using all these tools to advance our groundwater recharge and step it up another notch. And some key takeaways I thought I'd share with you is that we, as a conjunctive use irrigation district that relies on surface water and groundwater and a history of it, we've been doing it for 100+ years. We realized this year and in previous years that we can drastically improve on our own operations. And we've done so. We hope to get to the next level in the next wet year. So we're targeting an increased recharge capacity between 100 and 250 CFS in the coming year. And that will almost get to the maximum capacity of our channels coming into our district. We initially looked at allocations as a necessary evil to implement to comply with Sigma, but they become valuable tools and incentives that growers can use to help them have a good business plan into the future. And so we're seeing good returns on our investment there. I didn't really cover too much of this detail, but I have to commend my own staff because I was not the one out there doing the recharge. My staff was out there, and I want to say that they really took it to the next level. And it can't happen in a 40-hour work week. Our folks were out there 7 days a week. My water master was here 7 days a week, making sure we get filled up every hole. The joke was, there's a pothole, Aaron's going to go fill it up, make us fill it up with water. So just go fill it up with water. So we had water all over our district this year. What we found, and this is a little kind of hard to understand, but we found it out by making the hard decisions in 2022, was you really have to make these decisions before you are forced or have to make those decisions. And it benefited us by being ready for this wet year, because I've said this in the last 4 years, Sigma allows you 20 years to come into compliance, but I really think you only have 4 years to solve the problem, because you only have 4 years in the hydrologic cycle where you're going to get wet years. So, you know, in the time that Sigma's been in place, we have, you know, we've had 19 and 23. One could say we've had 17, 19, and 23. So do we have 2 left? Maybe 3 left. And so what I want to do is encourage everybody, dig deep, be a part of the cool kids, look at recharge. It's got its challenges ahead of it. We are cognizant of water quality issues, potential flooding issues, and we're working through those. And this year proved that we can manage around those. But the state, like Director Nema said, we all have hope now. We can get it done, and Sigma compliance becomes a reality for us. So I really appreciate the time. And I think if there's time, if there's any questions, I think I'm available for any questions.
We would love to take a few questions for you, Aaron. First, thank you very much. And we see your smiling face on screen now. So you can wave to all of your colleagues here in the room if you like. Any questions for Aaron and the experience in Tulare? Run a mic over here. Oh, you've got a mic. You have a mic? Okay, here we come. I think Aaron needs it to you.
Hello, Aaron. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I just had a quick question. You said that 50% of the water that was diverted actually went underground. Is that an estimate, or do you have?
Yeah, it's a back of the envelope estimate that we've used historically. When we look back at historical records in our operations, generally speaking, about 50% ends up in the groundwater system. I would say this year we're probably going to see a little bit greater than 50%, just because of how much emphasis we put on getting water into the groundwater system. But if you just take an average year and we divert 150,000 acre feet into the district, 75,000 acre feet ends up in the groundwater system.
Okay, so just curious, the reason I'm asking, is there any science behind it that says approximately 50% goes down, or is that based on experience and what you're seeing?
Based on our system and how we measure groundwater, and we can look at how much gets delivered to the turnout and how much gets diverted at the headworks. If it didn't get used in crop consumption, it has to end up in the groundwater system. And as we looked over time and doing our water budgets through our GSP development, that's kind of where those numbers come from. Our water master is now working on the numbers. Unfortunately, this year was just so tremendously wet. Again, a lot of people look at irrigation districts or GSAs and anticipate huge staffs. And so I have one water master running all the water. And so we didn't want to have to burden him. So he's now going back, he has all the measurements, and now he can start doing his analysis and report. So over the next 2 or 3 months, albeit you have to understand, we did give him a vacation before we asked him to do all these reports. So.
Hi, Aaron, this is Daryl Evenson, Stockton East Water District. Good to hear from you. We've got a lot of walnut growers. I'd be very interested in getting some more information on that orchard where there's no problems with the flooding.
Yeah, we've had some significant concerns. Walnuts not liking what we call the wet feet or the root system. Again, I think interestingly in our irrigation district, because of the walnut industry, where most of our walnuts are being taken out right now. But I would suggest that you look at a system like a totem system and identify the sandy soils and do your water applications over irrigation in those sandy soils, then you minimize the risk there of any damage. But yeah, there's not a lot of science around the almonds. The almond board has done a fantastic job on the almonds. And what we've seen in the pistachios is the pistachios, you can over irrigate them, under irrigate them, throw them water with water quality issues. They seem to be pretty hardy. So we're seeing a lot of that over irrigation happening in pistachios right now. Almonds, we did have some growers with some saturated soil issues, and the trees blew over. And so a couple of landowners had to pull their whole orchard out because just too big of a fraction of their field blew over to keep the field in production. That was not due to the on-farm recharge or the over irrigation. That was just simply oversaturated soils because of the rain. So if you applied more water on top of that, your risk goes up from there. So that's why we're targeting, even in almonds, sandy soils where you can do that recharge.
We'll have another one for you, Aaron.
Thanks for the presentation. I want to ask just a little bit more. You quickly said your farmers didn't want to put water in the recharge basins. They wanted to take it and soak their land. And there are some of these issues about, better on some soils and better with some crops. But were you surprised by that? And were your farmers in general surprised by how well it worked? And
So I better qualify it. We did everything, all of the, but there was just so much water in the Keynote subbasin. Again, Terminus Dam overtopped, went over the top. There was no, like our fuse gates didn't flip over, but we did fill up the recharge basins. So we had the recharge basins filled up most of the spring. We shut them down, some of them during the summer. So we were doing both. I would say the farmer participation, yes, that was kind of a unexpected activity that just fired up because we had that emergency ordinance in place and the water dashboard. So they knew if they over applied water, it would show up as groundwater credits on their water dashboard, and they connected the dots. I'll share an interesting story. We had a large landowner. He is fantastic. He and I meet probably once a month. He's got programs going. He's figuring it out. He built his own shallow recharge basin in his farming operation. He took out 40 acres and he's trying to, recharge in the heart of his farming operation to build up the groundwater levels. He was frustrated because his neighbor, who is the largest landowner in our irrigation district, wasn't doing anything. So he was like, "Hey, Aaron, you got to go call that grower and tell him he's got to get his act together. Because if I'm the only one doing recharge, then I'm going to be, building up his water level." Well, the next day, interestingly, the neighbor called me and said, "Hey, Aaron, what's going on? Everybody's taking water right now, but there's nobody growing anything. What's going on?" I said, "Well, everybody figured it out. You can get, if you put it in your system and we track what goes into the groundwater system and you get credit for it." And he said, "Well, Aaron, I'm calling Marco, the water master." And he said, I want to turn on this afternoon at 4:00. So I was like at noon. He fired up, and when he irrigates with big pumps. He fired up every pump he had on his system. He flooded his fields, he flooded the roads, he had water everywhere. That other the guy that built the pond called me. He goes, "What did you tell him? Because he's got water everywhere. He made a mess everywhere." The funny part was everybody was just laughing because at that point, that almost, I would say, probably 4,000 to 5,000 acres of ground was covered in 3 to 4 inches of water across it, recharging, right? And it stayed that way from March, April, and maybe a little bit into May. So of cycling that water in and out. So the farmers really it became I believe it's a new practice. It's just a agricultural practice now in their toolbox.
Aaron, we have three. Am I on? We have 3 questions in the room for you, 3 more to go, and then we're going to transition. So
Sounds good.
We're going to go to Kristen, then Mark, and then up here to this gentleman.
Hi, Aaron. Kristen Zicke, devout member of the Aaron Fukuda fan club. So thanks for letting us pepper you with questions. Does your irrigation district recover all of your expenses through the cost of water? Or is there a policy or kind of rule of thumb with how you've evaluated the district's expenses versus the farmer's expenses in this new effort?
No, we don't. But the growers did pay for that water supply. We have what we call a water accounting framework, and that generally says ownership of groundwater follows the investment in that water. So if you as a grower invested in it, you get credit for it. We do not really recover 100%. And Kristen, we went through the battles, right, of a Prop 218. So I have now increased my Prop 218 land assessments on my growers by 4.5 times in order to try and balance that equation. And so the idea is to keep the cost of my water low and reasonable so that they can get it into the ground at an affordable price, and keep my assessments reasonable to keep the kind of the admin and other overhead costs covered from that perspective. But yeah, just the rate of the water does not cover necessarily all the expenses. And when I have a blended supply of water from CVP and Friant. If I were all on if I were all on Kauai water, I would cover it. But we never have that situation. We're blending CVP with local supply.
Yes, hi, Mark Hudson. How much did the excess water cost the growers per acre foot, and what is their assessment right now?
So the cost of the water, we did have a small. It started out at $52. No, I'm sorry. It started at $42 per acre foot. And then we did have some free water for a very short period when the Army Corps issued we were forced to take water, and then we went to $52 an acre foot in the, I want to say, April time period. And our assessments last year were $67 per acre. We're at $85 per acre, and we're scheduled to be our maximum land assessment will be at $140 by 2027.
Aaron, Justin Frederickson, the California Farm Bureau. It's a little mysterious how you're hearing me, but I assume you're hearing me. This is, so I had a question for you, Aaron. You know, you hear about bright spots like Tulare ID, Madera ID, places who are, you know, well plumbed and have lots of experience doing this kind of things, you know, going back as long as 100 years, have the water rights, have a lot of the infrastructure. You talked about all the different, very sophisticated things you're doing that are forward looking. So, and that's for your 65,000 acre district. What do you think there's enough? And you also, the other sobering thing you talked about is the timeline for Sigma and the importance of these wet years and how we really only have a couple more shots to get this right valley-wide, not just within individual districts. So my question is, what do you see as the critical path for navigating that in a very compressed time period over just the next few, you know, couple of wet years for the valley as a whole?
Yeah, I wish I had I can present this flyer to you, says, here's the plan. I know that within our GSA, we've kind of flipped the narrative of the way our 2020 groundwater sustainability plan was written. And I think every GSA had written it in this fashion, that we are going to approach the solution by plan A is build projects and do groundwater recharge. And I think what I'm presenting today is we flipped that narrative. We said plan A is the allocation and the cutback, right? Demand management. And plan B is the project. And when we flipped that, we started to see our growers understand sustainability, or our ability to get to sustainability a little bit better. That conversation does not fit if you're in an area where you have groundwater only, because your tools, if you say plan A is, oh, we're only going to allocate and cut you back, but you really don't have anything, that scenario is basically going to take you out of business. So I think it's a lot more difficult. I know in our sub-basin, I'm working with some concepts where if those areas are willing to work with our areas, we're open to setting up programs where we can help those areas have a plan B, right? But they almost have to accept the plan A, the allocation and the cutback first, and then we can help them with the projects. And then we'll try and salvage as much agricultural production as we can. And again, you're right. If we only have, let's say, 3 more wet years to go, and if the forecasters are right and the next one's this year, we better put those in place today. And I am working with my 2 neighboring GSAs about doing that right now, so that if December turns wet, we're not only recharging in Tulare Irrigation District, we're recharging throughout the Kauai Subbasin.
Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and joining us remotely.